Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Mike Schwartz, and I have been working with the Department of Education for a long time. It's been almost 20 years or so. I came to start working at the department for, 6 months, a year, trying something new, and I am still here 20 years later, and I'm enjoying it. It's been a wonderful, wonderful place to be a part of. And I'm going to let Karen, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hello, I'm Karen Mazzo. I'm the Professional Development Director at Demonstrate Success, and I work with Mike. Going to help out a little.
Yeah.
I'll be looking at questions and in the chat and so on.
Thank you, Karen. And Karen, I know you may drop off a little early. It's totally fine, but I will just let me know when, and I'll start checking the chat myself.
Okay.
We are excited to be able to share the updates and iPlatform system. iPlatform, for those of you who don't know, is a set of tools that the Department of Education has put forward to try to share data with a whole bunch of stakeholders throughout the state. We're going to dive into that and focus quite a bit looking at assessment results in iAchieve, which is one of the newest components of iPlatform. So for those of you who have seen iPlatform before, you'll definitely get to see some new stuff today. There are 4 sections of what we're going to walk through today. I'm going to give an overview of iPlatform. Excuse me. I'm going to give an overview of iPlatform in case any of you are not familiar with it. Talking a little bit about what it's about, kind of how it's fed, some of the new tools. And then we'll do a little exploration of part of that of iReport and iExplore, so you can make sure everyone's up to speed with how you get through those tools. And then we'll spend some time drilling down into iAchieve. iAchieve, as I mentioned, is the newest component of iExplore or of iPlatform, and I'll explain what all these different pieces mean in just a minute. I'll actually walk you through some scenarios. So just kind of getting your mindset of, if I'm in a university, how might I want to consider using this? If I'm either working with students or prospective teachers, or if I'm doing my own research, what are some things that I might consider, and where would I go look for those within iPlatform? And then talk a little bit about what's coming up this coming year. A couple of things also to mention. So, the current commissioner of the Department of Education, he has been very focused on this whole concept of this state has been collecting a lot of data for years. Let's get that information into the hands of stakeholders throughout the state. And so he really has helped invest in the whole development of iPlatform. Dina Raybuck is one of the folks who've been working with the department for past several years, and she's kind of the mastermind behind the system as well. Lauren Heider is a name that you might have heard of. She is one of the main data architects behind the scenes that have aggregated a lot of this data. I want to point out for you, as kind of heads up, as we're looking through the system, iPlatform is a publicly accessible system. It means all the data we're looking at is aggregate data. There's no password or login required to get to it. We suppress some data. So if the cell sizes are too small, below 11 typically, then that data may be suppressed. And, obviously to protect the privacy of students. But what I want you to think about as researchers and working in universities is the fact that we have the data behind the scenes that we're aggregating. And that is available, depending on what you're looking for, and, how you're going to, what you'd be requesting. There is the opportunity to request some of this data de-identified for research. So the state has in the past, depending, on the needs, been able to get, as long as the data is fairly accessible and it's not a lot of heavy work on their side to get it for you, get you de-identified data where you can do some of your own research of looking at the itemized or autonomized data behind these reports. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And if there's something of interest, please reach out to me and I can see if I can help make that happen for you. What we wanted to do first was talk about where this data is coming from and kind of what the main driver of a lot of this data is, just again, so you kind of understand what it is that we're going to be seeing. There are a whole several sets of data collections that the department does throughout the year that is used to collect data from all schools in the state at the student level about the students in the state. These are 99% public school students, so we're typically not collecting data for private school students. So this is primarily public school focused. The collections include things like at the beginning of the year, identifying every student in the school, what grade they're in, when they enter the school, what's their race, what's their gender, are they homeless, are they living in high poverty, a whole bunch of information about students. Those data collections come through primarily a system called I4C, stands for the Initiative for School Empowerment and Excellence, but it's the data collection system that the state has. Separate from that, there's a whole bunch of assessments that the state has students take every year, and you probably are familiar with these. But in grades 3 through 8, it's the NHSAS, New Hampshire State Assessment System, and that's an adaptive test that's conducted by a company called Cambium. And every student in those grades 3 through 8 and also 11 have to take it in math and ELA. There's an assessment for the SAT assessment is what's used in 11th grade for students. There's also the access assessment, which is for English language learners. So all those assessments, we get the data from those assessment companies, and that's also collected within a large data warehouse at the department. Taking all that data and putting it together, that's how the state identifies from their perspective, based on those state assessments, how schools are doing, how are they performing, and they look at it at different subgroups. Part of it's all driven by ESSA, which is the federal act that kind of guides states in requiring them to look at school accountability. And that's done through the state accountability system. We will give you a link to this presentation, but descriptions of all these things exist under these links. So if I click on this link, for example, it's going to bring me up to the assessment page on the department's website, and it gives you more information about the state assessment. Let me talk a little bit more about school accountability, because again, that drives a lot of the data you'll see. But the state has to, based on the federal requirements, has to identify every school in different categories. Either you're good standing, the vast majority of schools in the state are identified as good standing, or you might be identified as either CSI, what's called TSI, or ATS. CSI are they're the schools who are struggling the most in the state based on several indicators, the state assessment being one major one. And it's identifying the schools that are in the lowest 5% of schools across the state based on a handful of indicators, which we'll look at in a minute. TSI means that it's not your whole school. Your whole school might be doing okay, but there's a subgroup in your school that's been in the bottom 5% for 2 years in a row. So maybe your special education population has really been struggling, and they're performing the lowest in the entire state, the lowest 5% of schools 2 years in a row. Or maybe it's a racial group, or maybe it's your students who are in poverty. But it's identifying any school who's in the lowest 5% for that subgroup 2 years in a row. And then ATS are your schools who have a subgroup that in 1 year, the same year that we're identifying your school, the lowest 5% of schools, that same year, you may not be in the lowest 5%, but one of your subgroups are in the lowest 5% that given year. So again, it's going to identify schools who are struggling in the subgroup population. To better understand the whole accountability system, there's a whole series of resources. So again, if you're teaching a course around and you're helping students understand state accountability or student accountability or assessment systems, these are some really good resources. There's an overview of the accountability system, and again, if you click on any one of these, you'll get some more information behind it. So here's an 8-page overview of what the accountability system looks like. What are the different indicators that are used to determine school success? So things like achievement, English language learning, graduation rate. This is an online course. It's primarily focused for New Hampshire education folks, but it's something that you might be able to get into if it's something that you're interested in. It's a virtual course. There are some 1-minute public videos that guide you through these different topics. And there's the homepage for the accountability website. So again, these links will all be in this PowerPoint presentation that you can take a look at a future date. Oops, I didn't mean to open that again. So I mentioned before that there are different indicators that are used to determine whether schools are doing well or not. And the reason I'm kind of walking us through this is because these are the indicators that are then available in terms of looking at the data across the state. So for federal accountability, there's 5 main indicators at the elementary school level and at the high school level. Achievement and English language proficiency are available at all school level. For both elementary schools and high schools. Again, achievement is for grades 3 through 8 and 11. English language proficiency is specifically for students who are English language learners, and students take that in every grade from K to 12 while they're receiving services. There is growth information. So the state identifies a growth factor. And the way this is calculated, it's going to be more complicated than what I'm saying, but the basic concept for growth factor is it looks at how a student, what was a student's achievement level last year or in the prior several years, and how did that student perform this year compared to all his or her peers who performed similarly last year or in the prior years. So if I was, the state assessment has 4 levels. Level 1 is you're struggling. Level 5 is it's called you're proficient with distinction, meaning that you really understand the concepts and you're on the right track to college and career readiness. So the concept of growth, it says, let me look at all the kids who were level 1 last year. And if I was a level 1, and how did I do compared to this year, compared to all the kids who were level 1 last year, like I was? It actually is a little more complex than just in 1 year, but it's that concept. So the advantage of growth, it lets you kind of have an indicator that is something you can compare regardless of how successful a school is or how successful a student is. So, you might be a high achiever, but how did you grow compared to other high achieving students? You might be in the middle, and how did you grow compared to students who are in the middle? So it's a good indicator. It lets you kind of look even at some of those high proficiency schools and see how they're doing compared to other high proficiency schools. Equity is very similar to growth, but it just overweights, creates a heavy weight on students who are low achievers. And so it's a variable that the federal government requires every state to identify some variable like this. And basically it's also growth percentile, but it's focusing the students who are level 1 or in your school or level 2. Graduation rate, self-explanatory, fairly self-explanatory. The details we could probably spend an hour talking about, but it's looking at it's just for high schools. It looks at the graduation rate. And college and career readiness is an indicator. There are about 10 different characteristics or criteria that 12th graders can achieve in high school, or they can actually achieve at any time during their high school. But we look at 12th graders to see how many they've achieved. And so it's an indicator, for example, your AP, if you took an AP course and you got a 3 or higher, I think is the requirement, then you get a point for that. If you had a certain score on your SAT, you get a point for that. If you completed a certificate program, maybe it's in plumbing or automotive or something, you can get a point for that. And the concept is, let's make sure that each student has at least 2 points. So if they get 2 of these different 10 criteria, then they're considered ready for college and career. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors, but that's just one indicator that's used to kind of judge the ability for schools to get their students ready for college and career. So that's another indicator we collect. I should mention, if that's something that you're looking at doing research on, the state's been collecting it for a few years, but they're going to be doing a better job this year of making sure every high school submits it correctly. So I would say that data is longitudinally is not as strong as the other data we talked about. There's also information that's not used to identify schools' rankings, but it is school performance, but they are collected and they are used as indicators in the overall system as well. So suspension and expulsion information's out there. So the state collects the number of days students are suspended, and also whether students expelled. There's also information about the educators in the schools. So at the school level, we're able to calculate what percentage of classes are taught by teachers who are certified in the area they're teaching. As you probably know, teachers don't have to be certified in every area they're teaching. So they may be teaching 3 classes of algebra, but they're also teaching 1 or maybe 3 classes of chemistry, but they're also teaching a biology class, and they're not really certified in biology. They're allowed to do that because it's a minor assignment. So we capture what percentage of those classes are taught by somebody who's actually certified in their content area. Same thing with the level of experience and also intern information. So that's out there as well. And there's also some more college and career readiness information, which you'll see there's some stuff around 4- and 5-year graduation rates. There's stuff about post-secondary enrollment, so an idea of what percentage of students are getting moving on to post-secondary. So that information's out there as well. Okay, so as I mentioned before, iPlatform is just a tool that is a public website that you can go in and you can kind of search and look through all this information we just talked about. There's 3 main components to iPlatform. There's iReport, iExplore, and iAchieve. So iReport is a tool that lets you basically look at kind of a report card for any school or district in the state. So it's basically letting us say, let me go look at Runlet Middle School in Concord or Portsmouth High School in Portsmouth, and let me look at that school and all these characteristics about that school. So it's a report card that includes, just like it might for a student, that includes information about achievement, environment, all the information we just talked about. separate system is called iExplore. These are integrated, but it's a separate part of iPlatform. iExplore, and iExplore says, okay, I'm concerned about one indicator. Maybe I'm looking at class size, and I want to see what is the average class size across all the schools in the state. And so it lets you explore that. So it takes an indicator and lets you explore that indicator across all the schools or districts in the state. You can actually explore and look for correlations between indicators. And so we'll take a look at that as well. And then iAchieve is a tool that is, for the most part, similar to iReport in that you're looking at one school or one district, but it lets you dive a little bit more deeply into achievement data. And so you can get a little bit more handle on how your students have been performing over time in the state assessment. So those are the three main components of iPlatform. There's some other ones. There's an iGlossary that gives you some glossary data. There's a report page. So there's some other data, some other information, but those are the three primary ones. Karen, I'm going to pause. Let me know if there's any questions. Otherwise, I will go through some more slides and then we're going to jump on and do some live demo.
There are no questions.
Okay, then I will keep going. Okay, so the way you get to iPlatform, the easiest way to do it, I'm just going to actually escape out of here and show you real quick, is I just go to Google and I type in iPlatform, NH, and that'll bring you to a link to the department's website, iPlatform. So easiest way to get to it. If you go to the department's website, I think on the bottom, you'll see iPlatform here. So that's another way to get to it. What I'm going to do is talk you a little, I'm just going to do a fairly high slide, do some slides. Just again, you'll have access to these. You can refer back to them later, just to give you an overview of what we're about to see, but then we'll just jump in and take a look at it. Switch back to my slideshow. So once you're at the landing page, there are all three of those components that I just talked about have a link from that landing page. This, if you clicked on the link to iReport, this is what iReport looks like. So again, if I go to iPlatform and I scroll down and I click on iReport, that's going to bring me to this landing page for your ability to look at the data through iReport, kind of the report card data that I just mentioned. And so we'll go through and give a demo of this in a few minutes, but that's where you begin. So iReport, as I mentioned, is a report card style. And you'll see through all three of these tools, there's a common look and feel of kind of how you maneuver the system. And so through all three of these, you'll see tabs at the top. And in iReport, these tabs look different than the tabs in iExplore, which look different than the tabs in iAchieve. But these tabs are the way you maneuver yourself through the system. For iReport, there's a tab that gives you an overall profile of the school district. There's a tab for achievement data, a tab for environment, which includes things like suspension, cost per the average teacher salary, educator information, et cetera. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. In iExplore, again, you see similar tabs around the top. And so again, iExplore lets you explore information across the state. So in this case, we're looking at average class size, and you can see the average class size for every school in the state. It actually does a scatter plot of class size versus proficiency in math, and we'll take a look at something like that when we get to iExplore. And then iAchieve, again, tabs across the top. The focus is achievement data. And here we're going to find out more information about the assessment, information about the participation in the assessment. You'll be able to look at individual achievement levels over time. So some more information about the achievement data. So let's go ahead and we're going to drill into iAchieve. We'll also look at iPlatform. iReport and iExplore briefly. I will, even before we go into it, just show you that there are some slides here that again walk you through the tool. It walks you through kind of the four main components of it. I actually talk about some of the things that we'll look at. So if you forget what I've looked at, we're actually most likely will post the recording of this as well. But realize that it's on the PowerPoint slide, and you can go back here and look at some of the things that I'm going to show you live in just a minute. Okay, so let's do that. Let's get out of the presentation. Let's go back to the iPlatform page. I'm just going to move my little toolbar over here. And as I mentioned, there are the three main tools are iAchieve, iReport, and iExplore. You can play around, so you can go to this website. There's no login required. You can't break anything. Click wherever you want. If something doesn't come up right, contact us. You'll have our emails here. And we will definitely work with Dean and the folks at the department who oversee this to get it corrected. The other thing I should point out is the department, one of the things the department did is this, they originally, part of this was developed by a third party. The department has since brought this all in-house. So all of this is managed and owned by the department. So there is the ability and the desire to continue to improve this whole system. So as you're using it, please let us know and reach out to the department, reach out to us, and we can get the information to the folks at the department on things that can be enhanced in the system. Okay, so we're going to go through just the order I talked before. iReport, iExplore quickly, and then we'll focus on iAchieve. And I'm hoping, we'll do this for another 15 or 20 minutes, most likely at least, and then give some time if there's anything else folks want me to look at, we can explore through it. Okay, so the landing page for iReport, I mentioned it's a report card. So the first thing you do is you need to say, whose report card do I want to look at? So you can type in a school and you can search, so maybe I'll just search for Portsmouth, and I want to look at Portsmouth Middle School, just as an example. So I'm going to click, and I can choose the year of data. You'll see you can actually go back years when you're looking at the data in iReport. And this is going to open up the report card. We see all those tabs I talked about. It defaults and it tells you some general information about the school. It tells you the enrollment count. It tells you the breakup of gender. It has information about the student population, the percentage of students economically disadvantaged. In this case, the number of these other indicators are so small, we're suppressing it, but also the number of students with disability. If you went to another district, for example, Manchester or Nashua, obviously, English language learners and some of this other data may not be suppressed. The system, throughout the system, has a lot of places where you can get more data by hovering. So I encourage you to move your cursor around and see what you find. Here, if we hover over the enrollment, we can look at the enrollment trend over time and see how in Portsmouth Middle School, for example, they went up a little in 21, but now they're going down in their enrollment. If you hover over the economic disadvantage data, you can actually see longitudinally over several years what that data looked like. So here we can see their percentage of students who are free and reduced has been dropping quite a bit. Now, some of these things, like this is a great example, as you might know it from a research perspective, that may be because the population in New Hampshire, Portsmouth is changing, or it may also be because less people might be identifying themselves as free and reduced. That happened in part during the pandemic. During the pandemic, schools were able to offer free lunch to everybody in the school. And so it made it harder for them to collect the information from parents about who's actually free and reduced. There is a great incentive for schools to collect that data accurately because they get additional adequacy funding based on the percentage of students who are free and reduced. So there is an incentive for schools to do it, and they typically try to do the best they can, but realize that things like the pandemic did affect that a bit. I won't go through all of these, but for each one of these links, like if I look at achievement, you will see typically the screen is broken up into multiple areas. One area where it tells you the overall information about that factor. So this is the overall achievement. It's giving us the percentage of students who are proficient in English language arts as measured by the state assessment test. It usually gives you information by putting that in context. So you can see how is the school, Portsmouth Middle School, which is in yellow, doing in contrast to the district, which is in blue. They got a little bit higher percentage of students proficient across the entire district. And then how is the state? What is the state doing? So, and then actually, as you can see this pop up, you can actually look at the grade level. So here you can see where for example, we see that the elementary schools is doing a little bit better, or they're doing a little bit better at the overall in the district. And that looks like because 5th grade is very high and 11th grade is high, that must drive up the overall average above grade 6 through 7 and 8. But you can see across the board, they're doing much better than the state level. I'll just jump to educator just so you can see one more characteristic. And this is true, this is obviously important to those of you who are in ed prep programs. But this shows us the percentage of classes in Portsmouth that are taught by a certified teacher, percentage of classes taught by educators who are experienced, meaning they have at least 3 years of a teacher license in New Hampshire, and they've been deemed proficient as a teacher, effective as a teacher over those 3 years. And then also the percentage of classes taught by somebody on an intern path. And so typically that would be like a statement of eligibility where they're doing a plan within the school. So as an ed prep program, this might, that's where some of you are, this might be something that you want to look at to understand what districts have higher percentage of teachers who are not certified in the subject, or other data to that effect. A couple other things to point out is obviously, like if I click on college, but I'm looking at a middle school, you're not going to see anything. So you'd have to change the school. Also, finance data. We don't have 2022 finance data yet. The state is still back a year for that. That data should be rolled out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Same thing goes with this ESSA data. We don't have that for 2022 yet. Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to show you for iReport. I'm going to go back and I'm going to Google iPlatform NH again, go back to that link, and now we're going to go take a look at iExplore. And although actually I could click on iExplore and go right to it, I'm actually going to go back to, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I want to go back to iReport. Doesn't take me too long. Apologize for that. Try this again. We'll just go to Kennett Middle School. It doesn't really matter which school I go to. So what I wanted to show you was I was about to go into iExplore, and I was going to do that through the main landing page for iPlatform, but I wanted to point out another way you can get there. So for example, I think I was even on Educator at the time when we were looking at the average percentage of students taught. You will see throughout the report card, there are places where it says iExplore. And so here, maybe I'm looking at the information about teachers, classes taught by teachers certified in this subject. And I want to explore that, not just for Portsmouth, but I want to explore it across the state. So I can click on this iExplore link and then say I'm interested in percentage of teachers certified in the area. There's percentage of classes taught by educators certified in that subject area. And if I click on that link, okay, making a liar out of me. There's something not working with the system right now. Normally, if I click on that link, it should jump directly to iExplore. But for some reason, it's not. Let's try one more time. And if not, we'll go the old-fashioned way, which I was starting to show you. I unfortunately am having a very slow connection. I'm actually at the department right now, but for some reason, the wireless had gone down and I have to use my cell phone. So that may be the problem. So let's try it one more time. iExplore. Percentage of classes taught by educators certified in the subject. And it's not taking us there. Okay, let's do what I was doing it before. Let's go to iPlatform NH, click on the link, go to iExplore. And I could actually choose a whole bunch of indicators. So there's a lot more indicators here than even the ones I talked about when we're talking about state accountability. But one of the indicators is classes taught by certified educators in the subject. So if I click on that, what we will now see is a list of all the schools, and we're going to focus on just the schools. And we're seeing all the schools. Each one of these dots is a school. You can see the list of them here. If you go to the bottom of this page, you can actually click on, you'll see if you hover right over the middle of it, you can click on that little 3 lines that popped up there, and this sorts it. So you can actually see percentage of classes taught by teachers certified in the area. So in these schools, it's 100%. Scroll down a bit, and here are some schools that don't have quite all their school classes taught by teachers certified in the area. If you want to see, which of the schools that are struggling the most in terms of getting their teachers certified, here, obviously charter schools aren't required to. For a middle school, in the North Country, that may be an area where they're having a hard time finding certified teachers. So one way that you can take a look at that across the state. So that's the purpose, remember, of iExplore. Take one indicator and look at it throughout the state. The other thing I mentioned before is that you can look at correlations. And so this page, and again, we're on the first tab here called Explore. This lets us look at each one of these dots is each one of these schools throughout the state. And we can look to see, as we have a higher percentage of classes taught by teachers who are certified, do we have a higher percentage of students? I'm sorry, I did it the wrong way. Do we have a higher percentage of students who are proficient in English or math? And the answer here is no, it doesn't seem to correlate at all. You've got schools with very low classes taught by certified educators, but high percentage of math and ELA achievement, or you've got ones who have higher and high percentage and low achievement. As a matter of fact, you'll see it gives us a Pearson R value of negative 0.01. So no correlation shown here, at least with the data that we're looking at. You will see a bunch of different things here. Discover, for example, we'll take a look at some of these later, but these let you look at two different indicators across the state. It doesn't even have to do with assessment data. iExplore, we'll come back here a little bit later, but that's the purpose of iExplore, letting you look at those indicators across the state. So finally, let me jump into iAchieve. So we'll go back to iPlatform. We will go into iAchieve. And again, what I mentioned, this tool primarily lets you do is dive into achievement data in a little bit more detail than we saw before. And so again, the purpose of iAchieve is typically to look at a school or a district. You can also look at the entire state if you want. I will go ahead and let's choose Portsmouth again. So I can type in Portsmouth. Maybe this time we will look at the entire district. If I spell it, it works better. If I spell it correctly, I can choose the entire district. And this will let us look at that achievement data for the district. There are 4 tabs in iAchieve. The first tab deals with participation. So really what this is showing us here is giving us an idea of all the students in the school, what percentage of the students actually took the test. There is a negative consequence for schools in determining their accountability if more than 5% of their students don't take the test. The federal government requires that. And so if there's more than 5% of students who don't take the test, then the students beyond that 5% are actually given a score of 0 when we figure out what the average achievement is for the entire school. So if you have a school of 100 students who are supposed to take the test, but only 90 of them took it, 5 of your students will actually be counted as a 0 when we're determining the average proficiency for that school. That's not what you're going to see here. Like when we're looking at achievement here, we're looking at participation, it's only the students who took the test. But when we're determining accountability for a school, determining where that school is struggling, if they get zeros, that counts against them. Again, a requirement of the federal government. But what this helps us do is give an idea of what percentage of students are taking the test. So in this case, participation shows us that 94% of the students who were supposed to take the test took the test. And there's textual descriptions throughout iAchieve that are very valuable. So I encourage you to make sure you read them. This says number of students who tested divided by the number of students required to test. So it's fairly self-explanatory. It's the number of students who should have tested divided by the number that required. If you hover over it, actually shows you longitudinally what that looks like, and it shows you for different subgroups. The students didn't take the test during the COVID year of 2019, 2020. So that's why you see COVID there. So here we can see, by subgroups, English language learners, 100% of them took the test. There probably weren't that many in the school, but they all took the state assessment test that were required to. Homeless students, only 75%. So clearly there was a problem maybe getting some of the folks who were homeless in the school to take the test. People who are required to take the test means that you were in the school during the testing window. It also, these numbers, when we're looking at school accountability, we only hold schools accountable for students who are in your school at least 90% of the year. Many schools, say that they've got a lot of students who are coming in and out of their schools. Students are, very migrant. That frequently is not the case. Schools feel that might be the case because of, the number of some students that, they see coming in and out all the time. But typically, by and large, the vast majority of students are in the school the entire year. This FAY count tells us that. So FAY still stands for full academic year, and it's telling us what percentage or what number of students were in your school throughout the entire year. And here we can see of all the students, and again, it says the number of FAY students divided by the number of students required to take the test. So what that's saying is of all the students who were required to take the test, meaning were in your school during the testing window, what percentage of those students were in your school at least 90% of the year? And we can see it's very high. 96% of the students who were there, who were required to take the math test, were there 90% of the year, 96% of the year. So it's showing us that there is not a large migration of students throughout the year within Portsmouth School. You can also look at students who didn't take the test. There is these are negatively, or, one is the inverse of the other. So it's 94% took the test, 6% didn't take the test. It's just an easy way to break it down. And again, to look to see within within that group, or within each group, what percent didn't take the test. So you can look at subgroups. If you want to look at just the kids who didn't take the test and get a distribution of them, that's what this button down here does. It lets you say for the kids who didn't take the test. So now just looking at the kids that didn't take the test, what percentage of those students were male versus female. So here it looks like a few higher percentage of the people who didn't take the test were females than males. You can see that 75% of the students who didn't take the test were white in this case. 45% of the students who didn't take the test were students with disabilities. 27% of the students who didn't take the test were economically disadvantaged students. Whenever you open something, you click on something to open it, you have to click on it again to close it. That's how I made that shrink. So that's the assessment participation data. The next thing we want to look at is proficiency and growth. This has some really cool data in it. Includes data that helps you look at proficiency over time, but it also lets you look at grade level data over time, which we'll see in a minute. But here we can see that, again, what percentage of students were proficient. If you hover over it, it will give you that information broken out, gives you it over years. There's something called the interim target. The state has a long-term target. In this case, it's saying long-term over the course of several years. We're hoping that all schools would get to the point where 70% of their students are proficient. The interim target for this coming year or that year was 62%. The thought is over time, people will get there. You would find most schools are not meeting the target. Portsmouth is, got a stronger academic set of students. The growth is shown here. So we can say that the average growth of students in the school was 57% for ELA. If you hover over, you can see the growth for students by subgroup. Because the students didn't take the test in 2020, we couldn't do a growth in 21 because you need 2 years of data to do the growth. The nice thing down here is if you look further down, you then get what kind of this heat map or this map looking over time of how students did at each grade level. So here we can see in grade 3, how students did each year in Portsmouth schools. In grade 4, how they do each year. You can look in 2022 down and see how students did in grades 3 through grade 11. And I'm going to give you some more examples of these and how this might be valuable in a minute. And it does it for ELA, for math, and for science. Achievement level data. So here you can get information about achievement level. This has a nice ability to look at achievement movement. And so here where we're looking not just at what percentage of students were proficient. Again, proficient means you were level 3 or 4. Not proficient is level 1 or 2. And so here we can see for ELA, we should have seen in the other chart that there were 42 plus 33. So 75% of the students were proficient. We can now actually see what levels they were. So although 75% of the students were proficient, 42% of the students were only level 3. So they have, continued improvement that they can make in terms of that overall assessment. The other thing that this lets you do is if you hover over it, it shows you where did those students come from. So the students who were level 3 this year, the 42% of the students were level 3, where were they the year before? So here we can see that 28% of those students who were level 3 this year were level 3 last year. 11% of the students who were level 3 this year were level 2 last year. So they were kids who were level 2 that moved up to level 3. But unfortunately, we also see that 15% of the students who were level 4 last year dropped down to level 3. So there's always movement between levels. Your hope, obviously, is that you're moving students up and students aren't falling back in terms of their achievement level at that next grade. But that is what happens, and it lets you take a look at that. And then the academic growth also lets you look at information. So it lets you look, and we're going to actually be changing this a little bit in the department, but it lets you look at what's the average growth of your level 1 achievers for this year, what's the average growth for your level 2 achievers, et cetera. We're going to be switching this up. It's going to be a little bit more meaningful because we're going to show you for all the students who were level 1 last year, what was their growth this year. For all the students who were level 2 last year, we're going to switch it to that. It'll be a little bit more meaningful. And then you can look at the information over time. So you can look at that level movement, that movement of growth or that movement of achievement over time. Again, we have a COVID year, so you see a break. If I went back to 2019 prior to the COVID years, Again, you can see 4 years of data going all the way back to 2016. But this, you'll see now a continuous line to see how the students were, what percentage of students were proficient over time. So here you can see there, green is level 4, so there's kind of go up, down, and back up. Obviously, you'd love to see the green go up. You'd love to see the yellow or gray continue to go down. And the final part of iAchieve is the S indicators. These are indicators that let you look at the information about the school standing and where that's. So this school is a school. Oh, and I'm sorry. ESSA is only done at the school level, not the state level. So I actually have to choose a school. So I can go into Portsmouth Middle School, for example, and this will recalculate this for the middle school. But it lets you look at how the school's doing. So this school evidently is a school that was identified as ATS. So overall, their overall population, they were doing well, but there was a subgroup that was struggling. And you can see these levels, these are levels 1 to 4 again for these indicators that we talked about before. Level 1 is the one where you're struggling the most. So they're doing fairly well. But if I highlight for achievement, for example, this will tell me all the subgroups. And I can here see that students with disabilities were level 1. So that group was the group that most likely was identified as not as struggling. So overall, the school's doing well, but they're not doing as well for their special education students. And if I look at growth, for example, same thing here. I see growth is a 2, so they're doing a little bit better. But realize that's an area they need to focus on. Okay. So that's iAchieve. Hopefully we've seen all of the 3 tools now. What I want to do is just spend a little bit more time kind of giving you some examples of scenarios that I think might be meaningful for folks in the higher ed schools. I'm going to look at 4 different examples. And we're going to actually jump into one of the tools and see how we'd find out the answers. So maybe I am a student who's going to go intern at Bow Middle School. I'm currently getting maybe doing some graduate work or whatever to be a math specialist, and I'm curious how many students are proficient in math, and how did they improve, or have they improved since the COVID time? So I want to look at achievement data. I want to look at Bow. I want to look at math. And I want to see maybe how the students have been performing in math since the pandemic. Maybe I want to see if there's any trends in the grade level. So I can say, I'm coming in there as a math specialist, I'm an intern, how can I help them? What I might want to focus on. So let's go into iAchieve. I will switch to look for Bow. So let's go take a look at Bow. We're going to look at the districts. Maybe I'm going to be there to help support the entire district as an intern. Maybe that doesn't make sense, but we're going to pretend it does, in terms of maybe there aren't internships for that level. But let's assume that's what they're doing. So I want to look at achievement. I'm sorry, I want to look at proficiency, because I want to look at the proficiency. I want to look at how the students, I think the questions I had, sorry about that. Questions I had was, I want to see how many students have been performing in math. I want to see how students have been performing in math since the pandemic, and I want to see if there are any trends at grade level. So I remember that there's grade level data here at the bottom. I can also look at the percent proficient. I want to be looking since COVID, so I'm actually going to move us back to 2022. And I want to see, as a potential intern, how the students have been doing since COVID in mathematics. So I scroll back down to math, and I can see, here's the COVID year. I can see that it looks like, pre-COVID in grade 3, they were 64% and 60% proficient. Post-COVID, they're 60 and 66% in grade 3. So they're doing pretty similar. Grade 4, they were 60 and 70. Now they're 67 and 77. So they're doing even better. Grade 5, they were 36 and 43%. Now they're 40 and 49. So they're doing better. Grade 6, they were 48 and 54. Now they're 37 and 57. So not quite as good. Definitely struggling that first year. Grade 7, they were 63 and 60. Now they're 32 and 41. So definitely struggling in grade 7. Grade 8, they were 62 and 58. Now they're 27 and 29. So I definitely see high school, it went down a bit too. So I can definitely see in some of these upper grades, the students since the pandemic have really been struggling overall in terms of what percent of the students are proficient. I also said I thought I want to look for some trends. So some other trends that I might find if I look at this data. One thing I noticed is that if I look at, let's see, a couple of thoughts. One thought is that grade 6 is 48. Like I'm looking at these scores, 43. I guess I'm seeing a little bit that the schools in general, the students seem to be doing better in grade 3 and 4 than they are in 5, 6, and 7, and 8. So that's one thing I guess I'm noticing is that it seems like these numbers are a bit higher in those years. The other trend that I noticed was if I look at this grade in particular, I'm seeing quite a big drop from 4th grade. So these are 2018 4th grade students, 66% were proficient. Those similar, for the most part, the same students would have been in 5th grade in Portsmouth in 2019, and we see only 43% of those students were proficient. I also can see, we can skip COVID year, but those 5th graders, those 4th graders in 2019 would have been 6th graders in 2021. They were 32% proficient. I'm sorry, 5th graders in 2019 were 7th graders in 2021. They were 32. So they went from 66 to 43 to 32 down to 29. So that group of students, that cohort of students really dropped quite a bit. And we may see that similar in other years, but it's certainly something that, maybe if I'm coming into the school, I want to work with the school and say, maybe as an intern in math, if I'm going to be able to help focus on some students, we should look at 9th grade students and, see if they're having some troubles, maybe do some remediation with the 9th graders who really seem to have been dropping throughout those 4 years. So one way I might look at the assessment data and look for trends. This is a nice tool that you could do with students in a class at your university and say, let's pick some schools and take a look and see what kind of trends we find over time in the different grade levels. Let's take another example. I'm looking at cost per student across the state. I want to know, is there, do schools who have more experienced educators spend more money per student? So, maybe you would think that cost goes up with the experience of educators. So for that, I'm going to open up a new tab and we'll go to iExplore. We're exploring an indicator across time. And so now we'll go and we'll take a look. And we want to look for a correlation between 2 indicators. So that's this Discover tab. So Discover tab lets us choose 2 indicators. And so we want to choose, one is the cost per pupil. So that's the financial. So the average cost per pupil. And the other indicator we wanted to look at was one about educators, and that was the experience of educators. So I can choose classes taught by experienced educators. We don't yet have cost. I mentioned we don't have financial data for 2021 yet. So I'm going to have to choose this for 2022. So I'm going to have to look back a year. But what this now lets us do is lets us look at cost per pupil. So costs going to the right, and percentage of classes taught by experienced educators. So we do see some type of slope, maybe going up a little bit, that's saying, as cost goes up, experience goes up. But we also see very clearly that there are many schools with low classes taught by experienced educators and very high cost, and also the similar cost, but high number of teachers, experienced teachers. So you can see a school here, you hover over it, you can actually see this school is Temple Elementary. They're a school that has a high cost and low classes taught by educators. You can also see a similar one where it's a high cost, but New Durham Elementary School has a high percentage of teachers. And as a matter of fact, if we look at we should see the Pearson R factor someplace here. It's up here. 0.23. And so as a researcher, we know that a 0.23, our value is saying there's probably not a correlation. So given the data we have, there's probably not a correlation between these 2 things. And this is a way to help kind of take a look at that. Okay, 2 more examples. I want to explore schools who have a high population of families in poverty and have at least 300 students. And look for some high achieving schools. Maybe I'm doing a research project and I want to look specifically, and maybe it's a qualitative project where I'm going to interview principals, and I want to focus on schools that have a high number of students living in poverty. I want to focus on schools that have at least 300 students. So I'm kind of factoring out some of those very small schools, and I want to look for ones that have high achievement results. So again, that's something I'm exploring. So I go to iExplore, I click on the search tab, because the search tab lets us do this type of searching. And the search tab lets us look for multiple factors, and we can narrow down the search based on factors that we want. So we can look, for example, we want to look at proficiency. So I'm going to take a look at percent proficient, so proficient, and I'll just do an average of ELA and math. We said we only want to look at certain schools based on poverty, so I can do the percentage of students economically disadvantaged. And then we also said we want to look at only certain sizes. So I'm going to go down here and find there's an indicator for size. So it's total enrollment. And I don't have to choose another indicator because those were the ones I was talking about. Maybe I want to look at experienced educators again. And so now what this system lets us do is it lets us zero in on certain characteristics. So I can say I only want schools with at least 30% of my students are living in poverty. And it's going to rerun this report, and it's going to eliminate any school that has less than 30% of the students living in poverty. But you can see right here, some of these are very small schools. I only want to look at schools that have at least 300 students because, for one reason or other, that's what my research wants to focus on. And so now I can look, and it's now showing me of all the schools who have at least 30% in poverty, at least 300 students, here is the percent proficient. And so as I scroll down here, I can see Hanover Street Schools got the highest percent proficient for schools in that scenario. Mildred Lakeway also has a fairly high percentage of students proficient, still not as high as you might want, but a fairly high percentage. Whereas I can look down here and I've got schools that have a very low percentage of students proficient in a similar situation. So one way to maybe identify some schools that you might want to then do some research about. Last area, we've got, I want to help Amherst Middle School with their lower achieving students. I want to know if students who are in level 2 math last year moved up from level 1, so they're really getting people up, or was there some other distribution? And I want to know if it's similar for 7th grade. So I'm going to go, and this is achievement data, so I'm going to go back to iAchieve. We are going to choose, which school did I say? The Amherst Middle School. So I'm going to look for Amherst. And I'm choosing Amherst Street School. I think that's what I said. No, I said Amherst Middle School. Let's choose the middle school. And we will close that search button. So now we're looking at Amherst Middle School. And I specifically was saying, how are the students, are they moving levels? So that's achievement level information I want. So if I hover over the middle school, oh, that's right, because I said 7th grade, so it had to be middle school. If I hover over 7th grade math, I can see that of the 31% who were level 2, 17% of them came from level 1, 21% of them came from level 3. So 21% dropped the level. This system also lets you filter. So I can filter here and I can add, I only want to look at 7th grade. And so I can filter just for 7th grade. And now I can hide my filters. Now it's saying I'm only looking at 7th grade. And now I can see 33% were level 2. And of that, 24% moved up from levels 1 and 18% moved down from level 3. So here we can see in 7th grade, they did a little bit better in terms of having more kids, higher percentage of kids move up than move down. So that kind of answered this last question. So I know we're running out of time. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of what these tools are. I indicated in the slide some of the things to remember. We talked about some of these things like hovering. I didn't talk about the fact, but for example, color matters. So blue is always math, red is always ELA, green is always science. There's an iGlossary that you can look at that's on that main iPlatform page. So if you didn't know what FAY meant, full academic year, go to the glossary and it tells you there's a glossary item for FAY. Oops, sorry about that. The other thing is you can read through the rest of these. So the last thing I want to do is just talk about some things that are coming up. I mentioned finance data is not in there yet. Post-secondary data is not in there yet. And IDA data is not there yet. It'll be coming later in April. There's a new data reports page. So off iPlatform, there's a data reports page that basically lets you look at things like enrollment counts over like the past 10 years, many years worth of data. There's going to be a new landing page coming this year. That brings all this stuff together and gives you some more information about how to move between these different tools. And there's also some more trainings available. Finally, I want to leave up information. This is how you can contact Dina, as I mentioned before, myself. Karen is also Karen.Mazzo. Karen, I apologize. I didn't have I thought I had your email there, but Karen is also available. She's Karen.Mazzo at demonstratedsuccess.com. It's Karen.Matso. So with that, I think we're done. Certainly appreciate you all joining us. And by all means, send us an email with any questions you have going forward. We hope you'll play around with these tools. We hope you'll find this valuable.